while your world has stopped, everybody else keeps walking around and going grocery shopping, going to work, and you're like, why is everybody still breathing and work? Like, why isn't the world stopping? Like my dad died, and so for me, that changed the very core of who I am, especially when losing my mom as well. And then it was like, I am 49 and I'm an orphan. And it felt really weird because that relationship, um, while I will always have great memories, I can't physically hug them anymore.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions, mental health counseling and behavioral health counseling in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our Vice President in charge of the Behavioral Health Department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Our guest today joins us from the UK. We've got Lisa Archer here with us today. And Lisa is the owner of Holistic Coaching with Lisa Marie. She is an internationally certified and accredited life coach. She is also a certified grief educator, an inspirational speaker, and the host of the podcast Because We Love, Finding Meaning After Loss podcast. Lisa is also a breast cancer survivor. She is the mother of 2 adult daughters. We just have so much that we want to talk to Lisa about today when it comes to grief counseling and life coaching and all sorts of supportive measures. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So tell us, what is an international certified and accredited life coach? And then what is a certified grief educator? Kind of what are these pieces that you've gone through with your training?
Yes, so I studied here in the UK. I mean, obviously, I'm not from the UK, as you can tell. I'm from Seattle, but I've lived here for about 20 years. And I studied in London to certify to become a life coach. And then you have to niche down into what your expertise is. So for me, being a life coach was about taking action, creating change, the things I've done in my life. Easy personal development, easy. There was always this idea that grief because of my own experiences. And so then I thought, ooh, do I want to go there with that? So I then thought it's a calling for me. So I then certified to become a grief educator under David Kessler in the US. And so that was an amazing experience. And so, therefore, it was just about holding space for those who have any type of loss.
And I see you put in your bio that you had lost 12 loved ones within 22 months, which kind of led to your own experience getting counseling and grief counseling as well. Can you kind of go into your story and what led you to reach out to get a counselor?
Yes, absolutely. So that's exactly what happened. I mean, when I was younger, I had lost a grandma, and an aunt, but I was young and I'd never really experienced any type of loss. And then in 2018, so between 2018 and 2019, I lost 12 loved ones. So I lost my niece, and both of my parents. And 2 months after I lost my mom, so I lost my dad first, and then I lost my mom. And then 2 months after that, I received a call in the middle of the night that my 24-year-old son-in-law, Jack, had passed away from a fall here in the UK. So that, I've lost friends, children, and loss changes you at a very core level. And so you are never the same. And so for me, with such compound loss, I'm very pro therapy and pro counseling. And that was my first protocol. That's what I tell everyone. My first protocol was find a bereavement counselor because I knew enough to know that I couldn't do it on my own. And even though I had supportive friends, they don't know what to say or do or help, or, they're there, but it's not the same as a third party person who's not emotionally attached to the situation, right? So that's what I did. I was fortunate enough when I found her. Um, she was local, and sometimes it's about finding the right person and connecting with the right person. I mean, I think connection is key. And I was fortunate that I connected with her right away. So I was with her for a year and a half.
Yeah, it is wonderful when you do connect with the first person right off the bat. And it doesn't happen for everybody, but when it does, that is something so special and that is something so worth holding on to. And it sounds like you really, really dug deep into that work because you recognized that this is something that you can't go through alone, don't need to go through alone, and shouldn't have to go through alone. So I just love your story there. And you said that she had given you some activities and some exercises to do and done some interventions with you. Can you tell us more about what that looked like for you?
Yes. So it is again about connection. So she just understood and started to understand who I was and how I operate and what motivates me and what demotivates me, right? So she knew that I was a very much an action oriented person. So I need something to do, but not too much, because when you're so deep in grief, you have the grief brain, the grief fog. Sometimes brushing your teeth is too much, right? So she was so great about just giving me bite-sized tasks to keep me moving through. But she also said to me, Lisa, it's okay to not do anything, right? Like it's okay to go, not today. I'm not going to face this. I don't want to face this grief today. So I'm like, okay. So I put my hoodie up. I ate popcorn and chocolate and watched Netflix, and that was a real learning curve for me because I'm used to I thought I had to just sit in all of it and let it wash over me and like work through it. And to be able to set it on the shelf and go, not today or not right now, was powerful. The other things that she had me do was like free writing, so that was helpful. I realized when my dad was sick, he had brain cancer, and I left the UK. I quit my job and I went back to Seattle and lived with my parents for the 8 months until he passed away. I began writing, and I didn't know that that was a thing. It was just kind of, I just got my keyboard out and just started writing. And so when she knew that, she was like, right, let's tap into that more. And that was really cathartic for me because I couldn't read a book. It was too much to absorb. Um, then I lived in an apartment. So my husband and I had separated by choice, amicable. It was the best decision that we both made. And so I move into this apartment that is right across the street. In the UK, you have like funeral directors in local, like in neighborhoods. And there was a funeral director literally next, like across the street. And when I say streets, they're like bike paths in the UK. They're so small. So literally right there. So I was seeing hearses and coffins on a regular basis. And I thought, what kind of sick joke is this? Right. So I go, of course, go to my therapist and I'm like, oh my God, like this isn't even what is happening here. And then I find out that that's actually the funeral home that my son-in-law, what they used for my son-in-law. So the hearse, the car that carried the family. That so I'm confronted, right, with this. And one of the things that she told me that was the most powerful thing for me was she said, when you do see a coffin, just make up like that is Gertrude. She was 102 years old and like she had lived this great life, because I was always going to this catastrophizing small child kind, or like Jack's age. And so she was really helpful in giving me these visuals, and like I could make up this story about this person. And then she said, why don't you use the car and the hearse and almost make them, name them, and they have jobs. And so I was like, all right. So I said, Gladys is the woman. She's the one that's carrying, so she's the her, she's doing all the work. And George is in the back taking the family. And there were times when I'd be walking out and I'm like, I can't look at this, I can't see this, and I would leave and I would go a different direction. So that was okay too. But the fact that she gave me those tools, I was just like, oh, there they go, doing their job. And it just somehow took that emotional sting from me.
I love that. That's a good idea. I mean, because I couldn't imagine like after that much loss, like seeing that daily right across the street from you. And okay, so you'd mentioned you were in counseling for a year and a half. How did you learn to kind of go without your bereavement counselor then, and you moved into life coaching after that? Like, what was that transition like?
Yeah. So, I remember early on, she was like, okay, well, if you close your eyes, like, what do you see for your future? And I was like, I see myself they call them flats here, apartments, by myself, divorced, like separated. Like I could see where I was. And a year and a half later, she's like, oh my God, like you said you were going to do that. And like, look at, this is what you've done. And when I kind of felt like I had the tools, I said to her, I think I might be done here. And she goes, I think you're right. I think that, so I never push anyone, but if you say, I think you're right, Lisa. But then for me, it was the question, well, now what? Like I now don't have a counselor. And mind you, I did everything. So I would go to like gong baths. I was doing woo woo. I was doing personal development. Because I felt like I had to just throw everything at it. So I did everything. I'd go to Zumba classes. I was hiking. I was anything. And then I was like, well, but now what am I going to do? Like, this is my reality. I've lost so many loved ones. They're not coming back. Grief doesn't go away. What now? And what happens with loss is it shines this massive light on areas you're unhappy. It shines, and you go, life is short, life is fragile. So I better start living it. Like, what am I going to do? And then that's when I was like, someone said, hire a life coach. I was like, I don't even know what that is. Even though I'm American, I had to Google what a life coach was, and I found somebody. And then during that process was like, this is this is my call. Like, I know this is what I need to do, because I used to lead grief groups in the States of pregnancy loss many, many years ago. So I already had this kind of idea of healing, kind of a healing, but I was in the corporate world here in the UK. So I was like, yep, this is the direction. So then I did a deep dive into finding the right program for me.
And you've mentioned a few things. You've mentioned how that loss changes us, and you mentioned compound loss. And so, can you speak a little bit to the difference between compound loss and loss we might think about, and then the ways that grief changes us each time that we lose somebody in our lives?
Yes. So compound grief, the way that I understand it, the way the lovely David Kessler explains it, is it's just either one loss on top of another, on top of another, and it's just compounding. And so it's hard, especially when you lose individuals to death, who they pass away, and there's a few of them, or in my case, a lot of them, it's who do I grieve first and when, and how do I grieve that like, and you grieve each relationship differently. So how do I then do, and it's very complex and it's very compound. So it's like you have of peel it away. And what he said, which was so powerful, is he said, you grieve the person that you're thinking about at that moment. So maybe you saw your dad's watch and now it brings back memories. Now you spend time processing the loss of your dad or memorializing or thinking about memories and good things. Not everybody has that relationship. I had a really good relationship with my parents. So I was very fortunate. So compound grief is just a lot of different losses. So if someone goes through a divorce, they have to move out of the house. They don't see their children every day. There's financial implications. It's just compounding. And so you have to work through many levels most of the time. And grief in the idea that is loss of a loved one who has passed changes you because at the very core, the relationship that you had, they're no longer physically here. And you have, it just is not, there's no cure for that. And that then changes your perspective of life, of loss, of, death. It changes your view of the world. While your world has stopped, everybody else keeps walking around and going grocery shopping, going to work. And you're like, why is everybody still breathing and work? Like, why isn't the world stopping? Like my dad died, and so for me, that changed the very core of who I am, especially when losing my mom as well. And then it was like, I am 49 and I'm an orphan. And it felt really weird because that relationship, while I will always have great memories, I can't physically hug them anymore. And so grief is a very deep, deep pain. And if you have a complex relationship, which I've have clients who have complex relationships, that's a whole different level of change for them. Some might be happy. And I know that sounds crazy, but if their family member was really awful, they feel guilty for not grieving. So it can be very complex.
And then you also have your podcast, Because We Love Finding Meaning After Loss. Can you kind of go into what, I mean, obviously the title kind of goes into what it's about, but like what people can expect from your podcast? Is it typically people who have had loss that are on there as well? Is it mostly you talking about your own story?
The first episode is me talking about my story, and the rest of it is having guests. It's been wonderful. I've met people from all over the world. And my desire for the podcast was something, again, people who are deep in grief have a hard time reading, but they can listen. So I thought, what did I need? What would have been helpful? And because I'm really passionate about talking about all different types of loss, there will be individuals on there who have lost loved ones who have passed. There's those who have gone through a divorce, some who have had health losses, so they have ME or they have had breast cancer. And so they share their stories, but more importantly, the focus is the healing modalities that they use or are using and had used, like therapy or gong baths or breath work or energy work or whatever. I mean, I had no, it didn't, I don't care what their beliefs are and what tools they use, because my goal and my hope is that listeners would go, ooh, I'm going to try that and see if that works for me.
What is gong bathing? What are gong baths? What is
I was wondering the same thing.
This is great. Okay, great. I was thinking, I wonder if people know about this. So it's sound healing, and it's literally what it sounds like, gongs. So I just went to one. I just went to one recently, and it's just beautiful. So my husband laughs at me because I bring my yoga mat, I have my pillow and my blanket, and this is the best kind of exercise class ever. Like you just wear your pajamas, it's so great. Um, but it is all about noise sound. So it might be those crystal bowls that you see when people are doing these crystal bowls, but there's something really energetically powerful about the noise or the sound that goes in at a vibe, and it vibrates, and it's very vibrational. So you'll find that some people, you hear people snoring, people will fall asleep because it's so soothing and so relaxing. So what it does, as well as it shifts something, and science will tell you it'll literally shift something in your body, but also it just calms your nervous system. And when you're in trauma or grief or just exhausted or whatever anxiety you're going through, it just calms your nervous system. So no doubt there will be, where you live, sound baths, gong baths. They have sound healing. It'll be a different name, but that's what I was calling it.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it's so important to be open to all different kinds of modalities and all different kinds of things. And sometimes even if we go, oh, that wasn't for me, we know that about ourselves now. And we know that we tried it. And a lot of times we even learn more about ourselves in terms of why that didn't feel comfortable to us. And so all of those experiences are so important to be open to. And I think it's so important, as a life coach or as a counselor, that we're learning about these different things and encouraging people, because it is so important that we try all different methods to find what works for us. So I love that. And you had talked too about grief fog. Can you tell us more about grief fog and how somebody might know that they're experiencing that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because so many times, if when we're in grief and we're grieving and we're in the thick of it, if you will, it feels almost like you're losing your mind. Like you literally lose things. Maybe you weren't normally someone who lost something or misplaced something. I remember I was working full time, and that was COVID had hit, and I was working from home, and I was like repeating myself or thinking, did they tell me that? I don't remember that. It is literally like a fog. So anybody who's gone through a lot of trauma, it's the same response, is that it is literally a fog. Nothing seems to be going in. You're like walking around. Like I said, you're walking around and people are living their life, and you're like in a fog. And then what we can do if we're not aware of it, because I wasn't really aware of this until my therapist started talking about it. And I was like, that's what is wrong with me, because you literally think, uh-oh, now I have dementia. I mean, oh, great. Now I'm actually losing my mind. But when someone starts to go, no, it's grief brain, it's fog, and then you can put a name to it and recognize. And then it is, as you work through it, it's like the fog starts to lift. And so if you know that that's what it is, you don't now panic that you're losing your mind.
And so when you transition to find out your own life coach, um, was it focusing mostly on grief, or was it kind of like, now what do I do now that I'm outside of bereavement counseling, and what kind of things were you working on with your life coach then?
Yes. So I knew that I wanted to become a life coach. So I really kind of had a coach who was a business coach. We didn't really talk about grief at all. I was like, yeah, I did that. I did that. And when something happens, I'll go back to her if I need. So the focus was moving forward. So with life coaching, it's about the here and now and where do you want to go? And it's not therapeutic. So we're not talking about therapy. She's not a therapist. And so it was very business coaching, like, okay, well, if this is what I'm going to do, how do I go about doing this? We talked a lot about like limiting beliefs, the things that were kind of holding me back from taking that step. Is there anything holding me back? What are the stories I'm telling myself? Like, nobody's going to pay me to do this, kind of, whatever it was. So it was all just literally business stuff. Always believe, I don't know if you believe that, I always believe that a therapist needs a therapist, a coach needs a coach, a hairdresser needs their own hairdresser. Like we need other people, right? So when I then started certifying, going through the schooling, and then I got my accreditation as well, I then hired a different coach. So I thought I don't necessarily need a business coach now. Now, what I need is like a mindset coach. I needed somebody to help me with my thoughts. And so I hired a different person. So I've had a few, a few different coaches along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I mean, therapists absolutely need therapists, and life coaches absolutely need life coaches. It's, we don't do dental work on ourselves, even if we're a dentist. And so we need that team of people around us because we can't see our own blind spots. We can't think our way through these situations with the same thinking that got us into those thought patterns in the first place. So we need that outside intervention and those outside perspectives on ourselves. And even if they're wrong and the reflection is wrong, it still tells us more about ourselves. And so, I always say that too with going to coaches or going to counselors. If it's not that right fit, we still learn about ourselves in every step of the way. And I love that you not only went to one coach for one certain topic, but you also went to another coach for another certain topic. And I think that's so important. It's just like how there are multiple different kinds of attorneys. If you have an attorney that's helping you with a criminal case, you don't go use them, right, to do your wills and your estate planning, things like that. And so just because you have an attorney doesn't mean that other attorneys are not going to be beneficial to you in those other ways. So I think
Absolutely.
that's so important. So now, do you work primarily in person or do you work online with your life coaching clients? And what can somebody expect if they start that grief coaching with you?
Yeah, so I do, yes, mostly online, because then that opens up the world really. So I've got clients, in US and UK and India. And so it just opens up. You can have more of a reach, but people love to just rock up in their chair in their pajamas and like jump online and stuff. So I find that people feel more comfortable. I do have space if they want face to face. I do see some clients who do like that personal face to face. So that's fine. There's both options. But the majority is online. And I do have a bit of a different niche because I do life coaching, like people who feel stuck and they they're lacking confidence or clarity, like you were talking about, like someone just to ask the right questions to get that unlocking, the pop up the lid and figure out what their values are and where they want to go and set those goals. But so I work in the life coaching, but also loss, and not that many do life and loss or life and grief. And so I feel like they're very much a hand in hand. They are like a married couple. They do go hand in hand. So someone might come to me for life coaching. I feel stuck. I'm unhappy. I'm unfulfilled. I don't, and then as we start to work through it, we start to talk, then they go, it's because I've, went through this divorce and it totally shook my whole foundation and my confidence. And so we start to rebuild in the confidence. Vice versa, someone might come because they lost their mom and they're, 4 years ago. Most people don't come right away. It's usually when they're asking the question, now what, and want to build a life. They will then start to ask the question about halfway through. So if they have 10 sessions, they might just go like work through the grief and process that. And then they'll ask the question, now what? And then it turns into life coaching. So it is really a beautiful mixture.
So when people come to you for life or grief counseling or both, what kind of like interventions do you typically do in your sessions? Is it mostly talking, or are there like activities or things that you guys are doing as well during those sessions?
Yeah, great question. I am very action oriented, like I said earlier to my therapist. So I'm like, if you don't want to do stuff, don't come to me. So I am not for you. So there's very much action oriented stuff. So we want to knock the needle down the road, kick the can down the road, so to speak. So one of the most powerful things that I do with clients, almost every single client, is their values. What do they value? What are their core values? How do they live in alignment to those values? We'll do things like a life wheel where they're grading themselves in different areas of their life, and they can go, ooh, I scored that really low. Well, how do we put in place things to help move that to a higher, more fulfilled, more satisfied area of your life? And then, there are things like writing or, so it really depends, very bespoke. So what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. And so it's about what works for them. So meditation might be great and others hate it. Some are not journalers and some love it. So it's about just tapping into what works for them and getting the best out of them. And that is really how I work, but it is absolutely, I mean, they don't have to write a thesis, but they do need to take some action because we can talk all day long, but I'm not a therapist. So it is more about taking action and setting goals and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and since you do the two different kinds of life coaching, general life coaching and then the grief coaching, you said that sometimes people come in for life coaching and they don't recognize how impactful the grief has been on their current situation or on themselves. So what are some of those things that people can kind of be thinking about if they're struggling with something in their life, and they're not sure if grief has an impact on that? What kinds of things might they look for?
I think that some of the biggest things that people will come to me for is I believe we all kind of have this knowing when something's just not right. We're not happy. We're not fulfilled. We're not content. There's just something off. And we might not know exactly what it is, but we know that something's not quite right. And so when we're in the sessions, it is about asking the right question. So I'm also NLP certified, so I do deep structure coaching. And so asking the right questions and understanding how the mind works and how the brain is working, that we can unlock some of those things. So really, for me, it is a lot about asking the right questions. So most of the time, people will come because of that feeling, just that feeling. So that is what most people who come to me for, is the feeling of or they want to quit their job, but they don't know what to do next, or that they're just really unhappy. And then people will come for one thing, but it's usually not the thing that they think it is, which I'm sure you absolutely understand that. So it is quite an interesting, very fascinating.
And I heard you mention you do deep structure coaching. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I do the neuro linguistic programming. So it is about the brain, how, if the words that they're saying, I always listen to the language that they're saying. So as they're talking and they're hearing themselves, they'll be like, oh my gosh. And then I'll ask a certain question. So we'll try to also reprogram their brain. So their thoughts. So their thoughts are just like, yep, these thoughts are truth. So therefore, I'm going to behave in that way. It's not, is it? Like, we cannot always trust our thinking. So we try to interrupt their certain loops if they're ruminating. So there's tools to kind of hack and interrupt that loop and create new neural pathways. But it really is, I listen to the language, their body language, what they're saying, what they're not saying, and can kind of just ask the right questions to get down to the real core. And they do surprise themselves as they are speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I thought your example from before about seeing the funeral processions and seeing the different vehicles, I thought that that was such a great technique that you utilized there. And you know, I think sometimes we get a little stuck because we go, well, I can't change what, right? Like the reality of the situation. And so the idea of like making up a story about the person or about the vehicles can sometimes seem like, oh, it's too much. But when we realize that we're already doing that already, right? Like you were already making up stories in your mind about the person in that vehicle, right? They were a child, it was a tragedy. And so we're doing that constantly already. We're just not noticing that we're doing it already. And the same thing with the barriers in our lives. And we say, oh, I could never do that, right? Because so and so would be upset, or you know, this I don't know how to do this thing or that thing. We're constantly making up those stories all the time, and so we're just not being intentional about what stories we're making up. And we think of it, and we it comes into our brain, and we think that's the reality. That's reality of the situation. And once we recognize that, oh wait, no, that's a story that I'm already making up stories. I can make up other stories, right? I do get to control how I interpret and perceive this situation, and how I see the future. And that is such a powerful thing to be able to do. And it really does start with that recognizing when we're doing it already to ourselves. Yeah.
So true. So true.
Yeah, I just really loved that story and that example. And it it does change that compound grief that you talked about. You know, we think about the loss of a person, but we don't always think about the loss of our identity when it comes to that person. So if it's a sibling that we've lost, well, maybe we've always been a big sister, maybe we've always been a little sister, and now we're kind of floating in the void because we're no longer that thing. And who are we if we're not that thing? Who are we if we're not somebody in relation to another person or another a job or a place that we live? And so, you know, even just moving countries like you have, I mean, that is a huge adjustment, and there's a lot of grief with that. You know, you talked about the roads in the UK. I've been to the UK. The roads are so tiny because they're horse trails, and so when you if you're used to commuting on roads, in like highways and things like that in the United States, or riding your bike on paved, smooth trails everywhere, that's a loss. And we don't tend to always think about that kind of loss at like, I miss a big wide road, right? I miss a shoulder on the road because then I feel safe. If something happens, I can pull over, right? We don't always think about those in terms of loss. And especially if we're moving for a job or a relationship or something that's a positive thing, it can be so then difficult to see how those pieces that we are losing are potentially going to affect us. And sometimes it's like, well, I can't feel bad about that because I moved for, you know, now I'm with my partner, or now I'm in this great job or whatever it is. And so we tell ourselves, no, I'm not allowed to feel bad, right? About something as silly as like the sidewalk, there's no sidewalk or whatever it is. But those are losses, and they do
Absolutely.
impact who we are and how we feel about ourselves and the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So I just love that you bring up all of those things because it's so important for people to hear that, and to hear that, yeah, it doesn't have to be a loss that other people might consider to be a loss. When we talk about grief, usually people think about loved ones passing away, but oh my goodness, there are so many things. When we get married, that's a loss of identity, right? When we have a child, that's a huge loss of identity. And so all of these things uh, come through in different ways in our brains and in our bodies, and we're not always aware of them. So I just love that you're making that much more aware for the people
Yeah,
that.
I think, it's such a good point is that because that is something I'm extremely passionate about. So whenever I'm on a stage or a podcast or like I have a grief in the workplace training, anything, one of the slides is the different types of loss. And it's not even like inclusive. Like there's so many others I could have put on there. But what I find is people go, oh, I didn't think about loss of identity or empty nesting, or when the children go back to school, or when I get married or move to a different state or a different country. Like people don't think, or they lose their faith or their religion or their, community or their friendships, or they're not even really recognizing. And I think it is such an important message because when we can then name it, we can then go, okay, now what do I need? What tools do I need to do to work through it?
Oh, I heard you just mention your training that you have grief in the workplace. Can you kind of go over like what that is about, like how to work what if you're going through grief, or what kind of things can people expect from that training?
Yeah, being in the corporate, I was very fortunate when I was going through the losses that the people that I worked for were wonderful. But I've heard horror stories. And I don't know, I've been away from the US for so long, it's been like 20 years. But in the UK, if someone passes away, they get, depending on the relationship, they get 3 days off or 5 days off, and then they're back in. And so my goal is to train the HR managers, the directors, the CEOs, those people who are supporting their colleagues and their employees as they come back in. They don't have to be a therapist to them, but they can signpost to a therapist. They don't have to be, or a grief coach or whatever, because someone's going through a divorce. So it is about recognizing the different types of loss, how grief impacts you, how grief impacts your employees, how grief impacts them. What are some of the things, maybe tools that they can help? Maybe there's a bit of coming back in a phased return, or they could work from home some of the time. Like, how can you support your employee? But then also, there's just do's and don'ts, what to say, what not to say. I mean, that's the biggest one, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, some real practical things. And then I also talk about grounding techniques for those who are supporting grieving loved ones. So in this training, people are sitting there because we've all been impacted by some form of loss. So now they're going to also think personally, not just professionally. So I really want them to have grounding techniques when they're supporting a grieving loved one or a colleague, or they themselves are grieving. Like, what are some of the tools that they can use? So it's like 90 minutes and it's just all practical stuff that they can walk away and hopefully be more grief literate than grief illiterate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing. And sometimes for the team member, they don't know right off the bat what is needed either. And so I think about my husband when he lost his father. They had a very complex relationship, and the because of all different circumstances, the funeral was not until 7 months later. And so a lot of times, people kind of get busy like right away, get busy, get busy, get busy. They've got the planning, they've got all the estate stuff to do. And because of all of these different circumstances, we said, there's nothing for us to do right now. And so we didn't have that kind of push of like, do, get things done. And so we said, and so my husband said, I'm not going to take the time off. I'm going to save the time, for that time. And it kind of got me wondering, about, yeah, we give, so at our company, we give, if it's a first degree relative, they get a week off. And if it's a second degree relative, I think it's like 3 days or something. And so when that happens, though, a lot of times we think about that time off as time to do planning, time to do things. And really what I found with my husband, even though he didn't take that time off of work during that time, it was helpful for him to at least kind of be able to give himself the space to know that like, okay, I'm still working these days, but I am still, there's a reason we take time off, even if it's not to do the funeral planning. And so that kind of distinction for him really helped for me to see that too and understand that yeah, I tended to think of bereavement time as like time to attend the funeral, if it's a second or third degree relative. But really what it is and what my husband had the opportunity to do because there was that delay on the doing was that he was kind of able to give himself the flexibility to do those pieces that didn't have to do with like physically doing things and planning things, but just about reflecting
Yeah.
and being himself.
And I think it is one of those because it's a different, you have different relationships with, with the person who's passed. So somebody who's lost their grandmother, they go, oh, she was older and she lived a great life. But actually that grandmother for her was like a mom. And so it's like losing her mother. But because it's her grandmother, she has to come back in 3 days. Like it is mind blowing to think it's such a short period of time and then you're back at it and you've got the grief fog, you've got the heartache, you've got all this stuff and you have to put this mask up. And that's why these healing modalities are crucial and having a good support system. So one of the things that I didn't say but is really important is one of the healing modalities that I had was surrounding myself with even though if it was a small tribe of my people, like those healthy, supportive people who didn't try to fix anything because there was nothing they could do, but just sat with me or just gave me that space. And the toxic ones are the ones who were my energy draining vampire friends. I put them on the shelf and I might bring them off the shelf when I'm ready, or I might kick them off completely, which I did with some of them. I remember saying to my therapist, I think I have a black heart. She's like, what? I said, because I just am not shedding a tear. And she's like, no, this is a great boundary. Like, this is really important for you to. So, so that was a really interesting thing. And I highly recommend that if anybody's going to do anything, that is one, like your first port, making sure you've got your support system around you, a healthy support system.
And so for you as a life coach, what are some of those differences between when somebody should go to therapy counseling and when somebody should do life coaching or when somebody should do both at the same time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, for me, I will always get on a call with somebody, and if I feel like therapy is first, they should do therapy first, and then they could come to me after. If somebody has in loss, so a death, I don't work with people who have just recently lost somebody. They're not really at the place of going, now what do I want to do with my life? They need a therapist to go through the process of the loss. It's so fresh. And for me, I usually see people a year, 2, 10 years down the road, and they're stuck, that then is a coaching method. So I do have in the life coaching part, I actually have I have several clients who are seeing a therapist and coaching, or they're going through EMDR and they have they have me. And it is a beautiful thing because one of my clients said, it's like she's the doctor who digs out the cancer and the gook, and then you come along and you're like the nurse who goes, okay, that's great, and now what do you want to do, and gives you the tools to do it. I thought that was a great example, but that can work really well together. So I always tell people, you need to think about what is best for you. Meet some therapists, talk to them first, talk to a coach, figure out what it is you need and then do that thing. And that is one of the things what do I need? And I just started, like I said, I started doing everything, but not everybody needs that. So then we need to ask ourselves, what feels right for us at that moment. And if it doesn't feel right, then don't do that. Do, therapy, and then maybe down the road, you might want to look at life coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you could give someone a suggestion if they're on the fence about either starting counseling or starting coaching or both, what suggestion might you give them?
Well, I always say that life is difficult, right? And grief can be super lonely, but that you don't need to do it alone, that you literally can fully live and fully grieve at the same time. And so, therefore, to me, if you're thinking, I'm just going to do this alone, you do not need to do it alone and you shouldn't do it alone. And that's why for me, I reached out to a therapist. It was literally one of the best things I ever did.
Love that. It's kind of where we started, right? On this podcast of you didn't have to do it alone. You shouldn't have had to, and you didn't have to. And just comes full circle. So I'm just so glad that you are out there doing this work. And we love David Kessler. So I just think he's amazing. And just a wonderful, wonderful program that he offers and that you're offering as well through him. I think it's just wonderful. So thank you so much for being on the show, Lisa. We really, really appreciate it. And if you're listening and you're interested in doing holistic life coaching or grief and loss life coaching with Lisa, you can go to Holistic Life Coaching. And the website there is holisticlifecoaching.org.uk. So you can check out Lisa there. And then also check out the podcast. So the podcast is Because We Love Finding Meaning After Loss. And so check that out too, because there are a lot of really great guests on there and looking through, there's a lot of different perspectives on loss. And like you said, not only the loss of family members and friends, but all different kinds of loss that I think we don't always think about when we think about grief and loss. So check out the podcast there. We will link Lisa's link tree in the show notes as well, plus the link to the podcast and the link to Holistic Life Coaching. So thank you so much for being here, Lisa.
I'm Lisa Archer and I need a counselor.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us